The late 19th century witnessed a scramble for Africa, Asia, and the Pacific, a period of intense European imperial expansion. This expansion was driven by European powers, each seeking resources, new markets, and strategic advantages across the globe. This era of imperialism saw nations like Britain, France, Germany, and Belgium aggressively carve up vast territories. They imposed their political, economic, and cultural systems on indigenous populations, often with devastating consequences. The justifications for this expansion were varied, ranging from the self-proclaimed civilizing mission to arguments of economic necessity and national prestige. However, these justifications often masked the brutal realities of exploitation, oppression, and systemic racism. Local resistance movements emerged in many colonized regions, but these movements were often crushed by superior military force and technological capabilities of the colonizers. The colonial powers implemented policies designed to extract wealth, control trade, and suppress any form of dissent. Infrastructure projects, such as railways and ports, were built primarily to facilitate the extraction of resources and the movement of goods back to Europe. The imposition of colonial rule led to the disruption of traditional social structures, economic systems, and cultural practices. Indigenous populations were often forced to work in mines, plantations, and other industries under harsh conditions. Education systems were established to assimilate the local population into European culture and values, further eroding indigenous identities. The seeds of future conflicts were sown as colonial boundaries were drawn arbitrarily, often disregarding existing ethnic, linguistic, and cultural divisions among local communities. These artificial boundaries created tensions that persisted long after the colonial powers had departed, contributing to political instability and conflict in many post-colonial nations. The economic structures established during the colonial era often left former colonies dependent on their former rulers, perpetuating economic inequalities and hindering development. The legacy of this period continues to shape global politics and economics, influencing international relations, trade patterns, and political alliances. The consequences of colonialism are still felt today, with many nations grappling with issues such as poverty, inequality, and political instability. Understanding the history of European imperial expansion is crucial for comprehending the complexities of the modern world and addressing the challenges that persist as a result of this era. The scramble for Africa, in particular, exemplifies the ruthless competition among European powers for territory and resources. The Berlin Conference of 1884 to 1885 formalized the division of the continent, with European nations carving up Africa without regard for the existing political and social structures. This led to widespread exploitation, oppression, and the forced labor of African populations in mines, plantations, and other industries. The impact of colonialism extended beyond economic exploitation, affecting cultural identities, social norms, and political institutions. The imposition of European languages, religions, and legal systems disrupted traditional ways of life and created new forms of social stratification. The legacy of colonialism continues to shape the political landscape of many African nations, with ethnic tensions, border disputes, and political instability often rooted in the arbitrary boundaries drawn by colonial powers. That legacy continues to echo. The consequences of European imperial expansion reverberate through the 20th and 21st centuries. Decolonization movements, often violent and protracted, led to the creation of new nation-states. But these countries inherited deeply entrenched inequalities and political instability. Economic dependence on former colonial powers persisted, hindering genuine development. Cultural identities were fractured, and traditional social structures disrupted. The arbitrary borders drawn by colonial administrators fueled ethnic conflicts and territorial disputes. Imagine a map, lines slashing across ancient lands, ignoring the whispers of history and the bonds of kinship. These were the scars left by the imperial hand. Take, for instance, the newly formed nations struggling under the weight of debt, their economies tethered to the whims of their former rulers. Picture bustling marketplaces where the echoes of foreign languages still drown out the native tongues. See families torn apart by borders that exist only on paper, lines drawn with no regard for the human heart. While some argue that imperialism brought infrastructure and education to colonized regions, the overwhelming evidence points to a legacy of exploitation, oppression, and lasting social and economic disparities. The grand cathedrals and railways, often cited as signs of progress, were built on the backs of forced labor, fueled by stolen resources. The schools, meant to enlighten, often served to erase indigenous cultures and instill a sense of inferiority. Consider the diamond mines of Africa, where generations toiled in darkness, enriching European coffers while their own communities remained impoverished. Think of the rubber plantations of Southeast Asia, where workers were subjected to brutal conditions, their lives sacrificed for the insatiable demand of the industrial world. These are not isolated incidents, but rather symptoms of a system designed to extract wealth and maintain control. The narrative of progress often obscures the human cost, the countless lives lost and the enduring trauma inflicted. The struggle to overcome the effects of colonialism continues to define the global landscape. From the halls of the United Nations to the streets of post-colonial cities, the echoes of empire resonate. Nations grapple with the legacy of unequal trade agreements, political interference, and cultural domination. Communities strive to reclaim their identities, to heal the wounds of the past, and to build a future free from the shadows of colonialism. This is not merely a historical account, but a living reality. The consequences of empire continue to shape our world, demanding that we confront the past and work towards a more just and equitable future. The struggle continues. And so, we must delve deeper into the intricate web of cause and effect, examining the subtle ways in which the past continues to shape the present. Consider, for example, the lingering effects of resource extraction. Vast quantities of raw materials were plundered from colonized lands, leaving behind environmental devastation and economic vulnerability. The wealth generated by these resources flowed into the coffers of European powers, fueling their industrial revolutions and solidifying their global dominance. Meanwhile, the colonized populations were left with depleted resources and a legacy of environmental degradation. The consequences of this exploitation are still felt today, as many post-colonial nations struggle to develop sustainable economies and address the environmental challenges left behind by their former rulers. Furthermore, the imposition of European political systems often undermined traditional forms of governance and created new sources of conflict. Arbitrary borders, drawn without regard for ethnic or cultural boundaries, divided communities, and fueled territorial disputes. The introduction of Western legal codes often clashed with indigenous customs and traditions, leading to social unrest and political instability. In many cases, colonial administrators deliberately favored certain ethnic or religious groups over others, exacerbating existing tensions and creating new divisions within society. These divisions continue to plague many post-colonial nations, hindering their efforts to build cohesive and stable societies. The cultural impact of imperialism was equally profound. European languages, values, and customs were imposed on colonized populations, often at the expense of indigenous cultures and traditions. Missionary schools played a key role in this process, converting local populations to Christianity and instilling a sense of cultural inferiority. Traditional forms of art, music, and literature were often suppressed or marginalized, replaced by European cultural forms. The legacy of this cultural domination continues to shape the identities and aspirations of many post-colonial peoples. Many struggle to reconcile their traditional cultures with the influence of Western values and norms. The psychological impact of colonialism should not be underestimated. Generations of colonized peoples were subjected to systematic discrimination and oppression, leading to feelings of inferiority, shame, and resentment. The internalization of colonial stereotypes often undermined self-esteem and created a sense of cultural alienation. The trauma of colonialism continues to affect the mental health and well-being of many individuals and communities. Healing from these wounds requires a process of decolonization, which involves challenging colonial narratives, reclaiming indigenous cultures, and empowering marginalized communities. In conclusion, the legacy of European imperial expansion is complex and multifaceted. While some argue that colonialism brought certain benefits to colonized regions, the overwhelming evidence suggests that it was a deeply destructive force. The consequences of imperialism continue to shape our world today, demanding that we confront the past and work towards a more just and equitable future. Only by acknowledging the historical injustices of colonialism can we begin to address the challenges facing post-colonial nations. The path to healing and reconciliation requires a commitment to truth, justice, and equality. The echoes of empire still reverberate, but they do not have to define our future. By learning from the past, we can build a better world for all. The struggle for a just and equitable future continues.